everyone. Welcome back. This is requested. Why don't you go live under the oppressive Taliban if you dislike the West so much? Before we get started, hold on. Okay, before we get started, there's a thanks button on the channel. Subscribe and thumbs up. You can do all of them. You can do one. You don't have to do any. But the thumbs up, please. Bare minimum. It's just, that's it. That's all it requires. So let's get to the video.
I've seen several times in the comments section as a response to your criticism of the West that the Sharia is much worse, and they usually mention the Taliban. It is one or another version of, if you want to see what application of Sharia looks like, it's the Taliban.
Right.
Or they'll say, if the West is so bad, why don't you go live in Afghanistan? Can you address that?
Okay, so first of all, I don't know much about the Taliban in 2023. I knew a little something about the Taliban 20 years ago, but the Taliban of today is an entirely different entity than it was back then. But you don't know anything about the Taliban either, let's be honest. For most Westerners, the Taliban has just become a sort of cartoon villain. It's a caricature. For them, the Taliban is whatever they say it is, and what they say it is everything bad that anyone can possibly be. And no one's supposed to ever question those assumptions. So there's the Taliban that actually exists, and then there's the sort of Western voodoo doll of the Taliban that may or may not bear any actual resemblance to the real thing.
I just want to counter that real fast and say that I've heard some things. It's not. But he also likes to paint the West in terms of broad brush. So I may have heard things about the Taliban that are not good, but I don't know, so I don't get on here and spew things. But the same thing, he says it's a cartoon thing of how you're told and what they are. Okay, fair enough. Same time, he may not live in the U.S. anymore. I think he lives in Germany now. The U.S. that he talks about, in a very negative aspect at times, may not be the same U.S. that other people would encounter. So he may put up what he believes it is, and what it is not the same thing. So he does the same thing, is all I'm saying, about how he interprets the U.S. It may not be the same thing how he remembers it. It could have changed. So, I'm just, point counterpoint.
And if you try to say anything positive about the Taliban, then they've already set it up in such a way that it means that you're saying something positive about a villain. And if you try to point out the context of Afghanistan being a war zone for half a century and suggest that maybe this context has some relevance to what the Taliban actually is and what they actually do, then you're portrayed as just making excuses for their villainy. I mean, Western narratives are typically incredibly hostile towards context, because propaganda is hostile towards context. Context undermines simplification. It shows the subject from too many angles, and narratives only want one angle to be shown. It's like that story about the blind men and the elephant, each one of them holding a different part of the elephant and describing a different animal, how they thought it looked. Mainstream discourse wants everyone to think that an elephant is the shape of a tree trunk or a snake. They never want you to see the full picture. So what we know from their own statements is that the Taliban has closed schools for girls in most of the provinces in Afghanistan. So when you already have the villain narrative in your head, something like this just serves as a confirmation that the Taliban is, oppressive and evil. Never mind that education in Afghanistan has been run under the auspices of American NGOs and American programs for the last 20 years. And they're teaching a curriculum that many Americans themselves don't want in their schools. And because of that type of curriculum, many Americans take their kids out of schools and teach them at home instead. So it could be argued that the Taliban is not...
Many seems a bit much. If you're going to say many, you should give a number. And I would say 5%. And I'm just throwing out a number. Most people may not like the curriculum. What? The curriculum? Is that correct? The curriculum? They may not like the subjects that are taught in school. But there are boards you can go to and say you want something different. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But by saying many, it sounds like a lot, and it's a very small few. And the downside is that if you do homeschool your child, it might have changed, but I don't think it has. But if you do homeschool your child can't go to college. If you homeschool them through high school, they're not eligible for college because they have not met the standards of what a college would accept. So a lot of people might homeschool them up through high school and then let them go to a high school. And that is where you kind of learn whether that kid is behind or not. So there's a trade-off to that. If you don't care, hey, more power to you.
Prohibiting education for girls, but miseducation for girls. They have said that once they get the curriculum cleaned up, schools will open up again. So time will tell. But that's their business. You and I don't know what challenges a government faces when they've been in a constant state of war and famine and deprivation and misery for 50 years. It is conceivable, that they might have different priorities than, say, Vermont or Connecticut. They might have different needs for their very minimal budgetary resources than.
And even those Vermont and Massachusetts may not even want to teach the same subjects. So, goes hand in hand with that. I have to sneeze. But yeah, he's right. You don't know what they're dealing with, but even those states may not. There are counties that are, the schools are set up differently, just depending on what it is. Smaller towns might have more farm-related content in their schools because that's pretty much what they think most of their students are going to get into.
Say California or New Hampshire might have. I don't think that's unreasonable to assume. Now, as for the statement, if America is so bad, why don't you move to Afghanistan? I mean, why would you want me to go to Afghanistan except to make me even more acutely aware of how unjust and how barbaric the U.S. and the West have been? Afghanistan is the poster child of American brutality. Do you really think that looking at the situation that you made in Afghanistan, the catastrophe that you unleashed on that country for 20 years, is going to improve my opinion of the West? That's like telling me to drink the water in Flint, Michigan, if I think that corporate corruption is bad. If I think torture is so bad, then why don't I go talk to torture victims? That doesn't make any sense. You should be telling me to go to some country, that America has actually made better and more livable through their intervention, not
Germany, Japan. I mean, right off the bat, those two. Other interventions, that would depend. It would depend on what they did in terms of what they were going there for. I'm drawing a blank. I'm looking at the presidents to see which one they did. Man, I have to sneeze again. I'm just thinking about a sneeze.
Worse. But I guess we both know that you can't do that. Now, as far as the Taliban,
I just did.
Being what the application of the Sharia looks like. I already know what the application of the Sharia looks like because I'm a Muslim. So it looks like my life. It looks like the life of every Muslim that I know because we all apply the Sharia in our lives as best we can. So no, I don't have to look at the Taliban or at ISIS or some other, so-called Islamic government or so-called Islamic state to know what it looks like to live under the Sharia because I live under the Sharia. I live under it every day, like a billion other Muslims in the world, with or without state enforcement, by choice, because it is the superior way to live your life. Think about it.
Okay. To him. The people across the street may completely disagree. They're fine living their life the way they live it. So, to him. This is his opinion. South Korea is another one.
About that. The way of life that you're terrified of, the way of life that you demonize, the way of life that you tell yourself is oppressive. 1 billion people in the world choose to follow it. But you want to point to the Taliban as the only example of life under the Sharia. People are voluntarily living under the Sharia all over the world, self-enforced. You don't have to look at Afghanistan to see them. They're everywhere, and they're hard to miss. They're the people who are not walking around in public half naked. They're the people who are not getting drunk, who are not getting high. They're the people who do their jobs conscientiously. The people who keep their word, who mind their own business and take care of their families.
So does that mean that I butt into people's business? I don't do my job? I'm getting drunk in public and getting high in public? Is that what that means? Because I'm not doing what he does? That's a stupid assumption.
They're the kind of people who actually are today what you like to imagine your forefathers were like before the liberal moral relativism ran amok in your societies. They're serious people who actually care about being fair and just and honest and charitable, people who actually think about Judgment Day and being accountable for their actions and their behavior. They're people.
So I'm not accountable? I'm not fair? This goes with his demonizing everything that doesn't agree with, or that he just doesn't. I feel like he thinks that everything should run the way he wants it to run. And that's bullshit. It doesn't have to. But because it doesn't mean it's instantly bad. So I feel like when he's saying stuff like this, she's taking shots at me because I may not agree. There's some things I agree with him. Some things I don't. But if I don't agree with him, does that mean that I'm terrible of a person? If that's what he thinks, he's an idiot.
People who live by a level of self-discipline that you would think is impossible. So you can't miss them. If you want to see people living under Sharia, we're everywhere. And us being everywhere makes the world that much more sane, that much more ethical, that much more principled, that much more moral. Wherever
to him, his opinion,
there are people living under the Sharia by their own choice, it does nothing but make that a better place to live, a safer place to live.
To him, his opinion,
a more decent place to live. And if that scares you, if you're scared of a community of people because they are living morally, living decently, living principled lives.
So if I'm not living that way, then I'm living immorally? What's he think? I got strippers over here throwing their titties around all the time? I mean, come on. That's just stupid.
Well, only a real villain would be scared of that. Only a villain would be disturbed by that. That would disturb an immoral person. So when you point at the Taliban, it just tells me what you don't want to see all around you. What you don't want to acknowledge as the actual Islam lived everywhere in the world.
You're also making the assumption that everyone in that religion is good, when we all know people are shit around the world. It doesn't matter what religion you are, what you believe in, nothing. There are just some really shitty people out there, and they're in all religions, all sizes, all colors, all creeds, every country. They have them. I don't care what they believe. If they believe in what I believe in, whatever it is that I believe in, and they're just shit people, don't lump me in with them. They're a shit person. I don't want anything to do with them. But he's making it sound like, well, no, they're okay because they believe what I believe in. Well, then that would make you a shit person if you want to be lumped in with shit people. If I'm hanging out on the street and there's 10 people, and I'm the only one who does not sell drugs, I still get arrested. Why? Because I'm hanging out with drug dealers. Now, eventually I would get released, and they would say, well, why are you hanging out with them? Oh, we all just like to hang out in the same corner. That would make me a terrible person after a while, because the assumption is I'm a part of that.
And because you've already named the Taliban as villains, you want to say that they represent Islam.
Well, the Taliban were villains because they were hiding Osama bin Laden, and that's why America had a problem with them. They didn't have a problem with them really before. And if the West is the ones who are... How come you didn't bring up anything with Russia? Is Russia good? Russia invaded it as well, right? We did help them rid Russia, but we're terrible for that. Okay, I got it.
Exclusively the correct Islam, instead of the billion Muslims in the world who are more moral and more disciplined and more decent than you. No, the Taliban represents a government that's trying to rule over the war-torn rubble of their country with horribly limited resources and continued international hostility and interference. That's what the Taliban is. That's what you see when you look at them. But what the Sharia is, you can see that in any good practicing Muslim anywhere in the world. But you know it'll make you look bad if you just come right out and say that you don't like Muslims, you don't like Islam, you don't like the Sharia, because those are people who are always praying, who are always remembering God, who are always giving charity, who dress modestly, who don't go to bars and clubs and sleep around. You don't like them because they're people.
Let's be fair, not every single Muslim you're talking about is a good following, practicing Muslim. There are some shit Muslims out there too. Let's not act like they're just highly righteous and they do everything right. No, some don't. Some, just like some Christians around me, are all talk, but behind closed doors, they're terrible people. They don't do what they're supposed to do. They drink in excess. They drunk drive. They do this, they do that. I don't care what religion you follow. There are just shit people.
With conservative values, who take morality seriously, who love God. That'll make you look bad. So you have to redefine all of that as oppression to make your opposition to morality look like a moral stance. And you have to pretend that we are against freedom because we exercise freedom responsibly and in a principled manner.
What does that mean?
And because freedom to you actually just means irresponsibility and decadence. And again,
that's a stupid idiot right there. That's a dumb comment. Me and him do not agree on this one.
This is why kuffar. Because it's lying. It's changing words for other words, mischaracterizing things to
You're doing the exact same thing. So what are you talking about?
obscure reality. But you wouldn't do that if you thought you were right. You wouldn't have to be dishonest if you thought you were right. You wouldn't have to use deceitful language to make immoral things sound moral if you didn't know on some level that you're wrong. Shaitan taught.
We're all wrong. Sometimes we're more wrong. Sometimes we have to stop and then think, okay, but he's making it sound like everything that he's saying is correct. This is his opinion.
You this because that's how he pitches it to you. He makes the evil seem good because human beings want to be good and they don't want to be evil in their heart of hearts. So he, Shaitan, redefines immorality as morality, and then you run with it. But you know you're wrong. And that's really why Muslims make you so uncomfortable. And why you have to talk.
Muslims don't make me uncomfortable. So, again, he's painting the West with the broad brush, and he's making himself look like an asshole.
About the Taliban and all that. To convince yourself that Shaitan's propaganda is true. So you can rationalize your disobedience to God as a good thing. Rationalize the moral decay of your societies as a virtuous thing. It's a breathtaking level of dishonesty, and it's going to let you down. It is letting you down. And it is by far the most oppressive way to live your life. Because ultimately, immorality and irresponsibility and selfishness are truly tyrannical and damaging. And the moral discipline that Muslims live by, the Sharia, is liberating and empowering. So you have to call what we follow oppressive, just to keep your...
No one's saying what you believe in is oppressive. This is about the Taliban. The Taliban may have what they do, what they don't do. It may be more extreme, just like other religions have. There are some Christians who flog themselves, beating themselves over the back because that's what Jesus would have wanted. Like, some are more extreme than others. That's what we're talking about. I've heard Taliban are extremely, extremely extreme in how they practice things. Could be wrong, could be right. I have no idea. He has this opinion that everything he's saying is right, and he's correct on everything, and there's no debate on any of it. And it's not true. A lot of the things he's saying are his opinion on matters. And his dislike of the West really shines. So I push back on it. And I think he comes across as an asshole. Maybe you feel like the same thing with me. But when somebody's bashing you, how are you supposed to feel? And I've never said anything about any religion being terrible because of. But that's what he's doing to the country. I don't know. Well,
Yourself from facing the oppression that you're actually under.
I don't know. He gets to a point where I just tune him out because it becomes argumentative when all you're doing is hearing someone bash something. It's just like, oh, okay, well, you're wrong because. I disagree with him on this one. But, you know, if you agree, it's fine. So I'm going to end this here. My stomach is growling. I am hungry. So I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to go get some snacks to nibble. And until next time, have a good day, have a good night.